They usually wound up at the locker rooms playing cards and goofing around. Gretzky wandered out into the hallway, saw the board, saw me loitering, and asked me to prop it up. Then I just watched him practice getting it into the tiny hole. There was no one else around, just me and the greatest hockey player ever. He never made it, but he didn't care. He was just fucking around and had a great time trying. I have one more memory of the Nassau Coliseum, and it might be the greatest athletic achievement of my entire life. Back in 1989, Howard and I once got into a discussion on the show about how he believed he was a better athlete than me. He had a tennis court at his house, and every once in a while he'd invite me out there and we'd play. He'd always beat me, but he was taking lessons every week while I played once every 3 or 4 years. Truly, I thought we were pretty evenly matched. Still, he kept saying on the air that he was a much better player and that he could actually kick my ass. He laid down the challenge, so we decided we were going to play one more time, once and for all, to settle the matter. The conversation took place first thing in the morning, as soon as the show went on the air. By 7 o'clock, someone had called in and said, "I'd like to see you play." Good idea, we decided. So then we talked about going to a public court where people could watch. But it continued to evolve. Another listener called and said, "I live in Jersey and there's a public court out here that has bleachers." Fantastic, we thought. Let's go there. Next, a guy who worked for the Trump Hotel in Atlantic City offered to let us use his 4,000-seat arena. We could sell tickets. It had morphed from Howard giving me shit to a for-pay exhibition in less than 2 hours. Then it got so much bigger. My buddy Ross was working for Ron Delsner, a concert promoter. He said he could get the Nassau Coliseum, a 16,000-seat arena, if we were interested. It took a day for the deal to come together. The next morning, we announced that the match would be held there. Within 4 hours, the entire joint was sold out. We called it the U.S. Open Source Tournament. This was a place that meant the world to me. I had my internships there, had gone to Islanders and Nets games there. I'd seen every concert of major importance there. Now I was going to be the main event. When we arrived at the Coliseum the day of the tournament, we wanted to warm up. I had on a bright pink shirt and jeans. Howard wore a bright turquoise shirt and never took off his sunglasses. We hit the ball for a few minutes, then Grandpa from the Munsters, Al Lewis, showed up chomping on a cigar and wearing a fedora. Al, Robin, and Fred the Elephant Boy, one of the original Whackpackers, were going to be the announcers. While having his makeup applied, Howard piled it on again, telling the camera, "I'm going to kick his ass." Then they cut to me in my bright pink warm-up jacket and blue tennis shorts. Finally, we played. Howard was introduced as the mentally fit, empty-jocked radio god. I was the oafish and dim-witted Gary Beaver-Teeth Dell'Abate. The ball girls, dressed in G-strings, pasties, and sneakers, were lined up along the baseline and at the net. We had screened them in the studio on the air one day, all of them topless, and seated around Howard's desk in the studio. As backup to the ball girls, we hired a guy in a wheelchair who was ready to roll into action if the girls were too slow. I ripped off my pink warm-up top, carefully so I didn't dislodge the headband I had on to keep my hair out of my face, and revealed a sky-bright turquoise top. I was ready. The match was best out of 7 games, like the World Series. Immediately, I took a lead off Howard's serve. He hit one into the net, the next one out, and soon I was up 1-0. But the next 2 games I struggled, and suddenly found myself down 2-1. That's when fate, and Fred the Elephant Boy, stepped in. In the 4th game, Howard and I were tied at 15 all. Howard won the next point, but Elephant Boy wasn't paying attention or had become confused by the crowd noise, and so he awarded it to me. He announced that I was now up 30-15. I quickly won the next 2 as well before anyone realized what was happening. Not Grandpa Al or Robin or Howard tried correcting him. Now we were tied 2-2. And I was shuffling on the court and pumping my fists like I was a real athlete. When I won the next game, the crowd started chanting, "Gary sucks! Gary sucks!" They had no idea how little I cared. That weekend was my moment. The night before was my 10-year high school reunion. Now I was on Long Island, 5 minutes from my house, winning an athletic event in front of 16,000 people. I was so psyched I started pointing my finger at the crowd and yelling back at them. I felt like I was back in my living room. Midway through the 6th game with me ahead 30-15, it got even wilder. The half-naked girls were running back and forth, whether there were balls to grab or not. The guy in the chair was spinning around. There was a stadium full of people taunting me, and I couldn't stop giving it back to the crowd whenever I want to point. Somewhere in the audience, my mom and dad were watching, perhaps the only 2 people cheering me on. Finally, I served the ball, and Howard hit a forehand that nearly landed in the stands. It was wide. I won the match 4-2. I was so excited I sprinted to the other side of the court, shook Howard's hand, and threw my arms into the air. Everyone booed. Pretty soon I was surrounded by all the ball girls in their G-strings and pasties. I also won $3,000. After I accepted the trophy, Howard and I sat down at the broadcasting tables, which we had set up before the match. I said, "You played a good game. You are not a sports whip, and you probably can beat me. But this week I'm going to buy a full-length leather coat with your fucking money." I was obsessed with owning a full-length black leather coat that I had seen in a store on 8th Street in the Village. It had big buttons and a giant leather belt. I had seen Sam Kinison wearing one. Rockers like Dee Snider wore them too. I thought they were cool. It cost $400, and I could have never afforded it without that prize money. One day after the show, I took a subway down to 8th Street, plugged down the money, and walked out with that coat. I looked like an idiot. I wasn't a rocker. I wasn't even Kinison. I wore it twice and put it in my closet. It's still there. It might work for a costume party one day.
Chapter 12. Champale and Intimate Companions.
I couldn't stop with the internships, actually. One summer I worked at a recording studio in the city. It was a jingle house, and I was the token Gentile. They had no idea how to handle an intern, which is to assign them the crappy work and then show them how to do cool stuff. All I did for them was empty garbage. None of the bosses talked to me. But it did teach me about making your own opportunities and building skills as you go. I befriended a young sound engineer who taught me how to set up microphones in the studio. I saw how to deal with clients. I learned how talent can fix anything. We were once doing an ad for Champale, a lowbrow alcoholic drink, and the corporate suits kept poking their heads in, complaining that the jingle wasn't working. Our engineer reassured them, saying, "Don't worry, it'll be fine when Grady gets here. He'll bring it to life." I didn't know who Grady was, but I knew the jingle sounded like crap. Finally, at 4 in the afternoon, after we had been there for 7 hours, Grady Tate showed up. He was an old black guy, a well-known club jazz singer, who swaggered in looking as cool as could be. He had a gravelly voice, but it turned the jingle from ridiculous to radio-worthy. I also learned how talent controlled a room, no matter how minuscule the talent. At night, the jingle shop transformed into a second-rate recording studio for would-be artists. Once they handed the keys to a guy named Miko, who recorded a million-selling disco remix of the Star Wars theme. When he came around, everyone kissed his ass, and I couldn't figure out why. Sure, he wore nice white collars and kept his shirt unbuttoned, but with his side part, high forehead, and oversized wire-rimmed glasses, he looked like an accountant doing karaoke. Besides, all he did was put a disco beat to someone else's song, but it made the studio some money, so he was the big shot. Even the last internship I had in the Adelphi Film Department proved invaluable. The film teachers there had started a business shooting educational movies and used the